So what are we getting mostly when we're studying the book of Ezekiel in terms of up stuff and down stuff? So every time you read a chapter in Ezekiel, you go, wow, that really fired me up. Praise the Lord, you know. Okay, Carla. Yeah, for the most part, it's like the Lord is trying to inform them that there's a reason why this is all happening to you. And of course, we pointed out that their explanations are not really from the perspective that the Lord or that which is divine, what he presents. They blame God for not really having time for them or something like that. So we're going to get a little bit more of a look at what it is they need to know. Now, when Ezekiel gets the message, it doesn't say anything about the Spirit. It says God told him. And so just about every time he makes a speech or a talk to them, then he'll present it with that in mind. In Ezekiel chapter 19, there's kind of a sad story there. And the sad story beats around the idea that there are leaders in Israel, and these leaders have not done their job. And mostly it's agreed that there's 3 different kings there, and so they flop. You know, they're kind of right near the end of the southern kingdom, and he tells a parable, and it's about a lion who has some pups or cubs or whatever you want to call them, and of course the lion would be, you know, God. And of course the cubs would be the kings. They come in and they're very young, and then the Lord, you know, gives them the information they need, and they, as has been the case for the most part, they just don't want to do it. And I think it's good for us because God has a very straightforward attitude about his word and how he wants people to respond to it. And they're clearly not doing it. So there in verse 1 of 19 it says, "As for you, take up a lamentation for the princes of Israel." So what's a lamentation? Sad song. "And say, what was your mother? A lioness among lions. She lay down among young lions, and she reared her cubs." So God has this close relationship with the people of Israel, probably mostly seen when they were in the wilderness, but he was there and meant to be there and to provide their guidance. So the cubs, they get raised, and it says, when she brought up one of her cubs, he became a lion, and he learned to tear his prey. He devoured men. Okay, so what kind of information are we getting about this king? It's right up there. So
He grew up to be a warrior.
yeah, and it says he learned to tear his prey, and he devoured men. Now, it may have been that it could have been the enemies of the nation, but the enemies of the nation were often people that were the individuals and the kingdoms that Israel seemed to sort of migrate toward. But it says, so she, in verse 4, "The nations heard about him, and he was captured in their pit, and they brought him with hooks to the land of Egypt." So you can follow at the end of the book of 2 Kings, and you can get some sort of understanding of what's being talked about there. But for the most part, he ends up where, after being not a kind, loving king? Where does he end up? Egypt, okay. And we are inclined to think, as far as Egypt is concerned, Egypt is a closed book. You know, they come out of captivity over there, and then they get in the wilderness, and they don't do well there. What's their attitude generally when they're in the wilderness?
Oh, why did you bring me out here?
Yeah, and they did it with a big smile, didn't they? Didn't they, Christina? Wow, this is really a great hike. We're really enjoying this. But anyway, so there's the king that was there. And my point is, the king is there. He's been provided training, and things just don't go well. All right, now, so cub number 2, when she saw as she waited that her hope was lost, she took another of her cubs and made him a young lion. And he walked about among the lions. He became a young lion. He learned to tear his prey, and he devoured men. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? So these are not the kind of kings that we got to a certain degree out of Solomon and David. These are guys that use force and weren't really the kind of guides that you want from the people or for the people. So it says, he destroyed the fortified towers and laid waste their cities, and the land and fullness were appalled because of the sound of his roaring. Now, as far as we know, he's talking here about in and around Judah and Jerusalem, that he's actually destroying his own people. It just depends. I mean, I'm sure it also happened in some of the surrounding nations, but generally speaking, that's what makes the most sense to me. Then nations set against him on every side from their provinces, and they spread their net over him, and he was captured in their pit. They put him in a cage with hooks and brought him to the king of Babylon. They brought him in hunting nets so that his voice would be heard no more on the mountains of Israel. Jehoiakim, and I say, is it Jehoiakim or Jehoiachin? And a lot of people have their own ideas about it. I don't think it's really that important. I mean, what we have here is a picture of the kings near the end of the kingdom. Now, what we're seeing a lot of is a kingdom that has kings. And the kings, for the most part, are not successful, correct? Certainly of the northern kingdom, they're all flops. Southern kingdom didn't do a whole lot better. But nevertheless, we've got something going on that we are a part of, because what's talked about in like Daniel chapter 2, Isaiah chapter 9, and in Luke 1 verse 31 through 33, and that is that Jesus is coming. He's going to be the king of what kind of kingdom? Eternal. All right, so that's going to be quite the difference, isn't it? Because these just kind of come and go, depending on the behavior of the people. But they're looking forward to this one and only king. And he's called the Messiah, he's called the Christ, but nevertheless, that's where we are now. So we're not a part of a whole semblance of kings coming and going and acting the way these act, occasionally getting a good one. But we've got the true king. And so when you look here, this is the vine. We get kind of used to that vine. It showed up a little bit earlier. But it says, your mother was like a vine in your vineyard, planted by the waters. It was fruitful, full of branches, because of abundant waters. Things going well? Say yes. Thank you, Dan. Okay. It had strong branches fit for scepters of rulers, and its height was raised above the clouds so that it was seen in its height with the mass of its branches. But it was plucked up in fury. It was cast down to the ground, and the east wind dried up its fruit. Its strong branch was torn off so that it withered. The fire consumed it, and now it is planted in the wilderness in a dry and thirsty land. You can see some of these lines are part of a hymn that we have in our book. But in 13, and now it is planted in the wilderness in a dry and thirsty land, and fire has gone out from its branch. It has consumed its shoots and fruit, so that there is not in it a strong branch, a scepter to rule. This is a lamentation and has become a lamentation. Sort of repetitive, but that's what it says. All right, so lamentation is what? Sad song. All right, now, so what we're getting here is the picture of, again, a king, the final cub, if you will. But then he begins to talk about it like a vine. But how does this vine end up? It starts out what? Really great, and that usually means they're being obedient to God. That then stops, and then next thing you know, they're destroyed. They're burned up. The roots no longer produce. So that is kind of important for us to understand that we've just got this continual depressing look at these people. So rather than just being discouraged or depressed, how do we learn something from this? What do you get out of this other than, oh man, these people were sorry people? Yeah, Dan.
I noticed in one of the verses, I'm going to go back and see if I can find it, where it says, strong branches, receptors and rulers. Okay, and then it goes on to say she towered above. Her height was dense foliage.
Right.
Really good. Not
Right.
just vineyard's doing fine.
Yeah.
Really, really good, like above and beyond.
Yeah, it went from way up here to way down there.
So the extreme.
Okay, so she was just talking there. I know most of you didn't hear that, but the king, under the guidance of the Lord, always does well. When they don't look to the Lord, then things go downhill. So that's a pattern that we can kind of loop. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I think for me what's interesting is we see God's patience here. What I take away is that we have multiple kings and multiple generations to fall, and descent could have been stopped if the people would have decided to change, but they never did. So it showed that God was willing to me, what I take out is it shows that God gave them many opportunities to change, many different kings.
Yeah, because we know they had more than 3 kings.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, we sometimes look and go, how cruel for God to, bring these calamities upon Israel. That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem just. Well, it's not like He didn't give them fair warning.
Yeah.
And it really shows, I think, God's patience towards us as mankind of how long that wick of patience really is.
Okay, so what we're supposed to learn from that then is, even though it's a rather discouraging sort of set of circumstances, but we're to see that God is really trying to get them to come back. That's what this is all about. Doesn't maybe make sense to us. Maybe we think, we should smile more if we're going to attract people. But the Lord has been patient and kind and loving to these people, and what's happened? Yeah, nothing good. And so we're fast coming, to the end of it. And so then what we get here is what is often the case is that to help the people to understand what we do is we teach them a history lesson. Yeah, and of course we know about what did Stephen do when he taught his lesson in Acts 7? Went through the history of the people, didn't he? People of Israel. So this is pretty much the same thing. And again, so it helps us to understand. I don't know, I want you to think about this. I mean, this wasn't the only thing that happened to these people, yet we're constantly being reminded of it. And that is what happened when they went through the wilderness. Now, just from what you know about it, most of you have studied this at one time or another. What was the matter with them that caused them to not just be real happy that it got us out of slavery, and now we're going over to this great land, which makes me smile. I'm looking forward to it. But what happens on the way? And this is the way life is. Go ahead, Noel.
Well, they become ungrateful.
Yeah.
And then they get an attitude where they think that they deserve whatever it is God has given them.
Uh-huh.
And then when they do get it, like the manna, then they ask for meat.
Yeah, so I think the important point here is that they just couldn't become happy. There's plenty of things happening to them to make them that way. And of course, this is the way our lives work. And how do I mean that? What is, obviously we're not wandering in the wilderness. Go ahead, Christina.
I think
When things aren't going well.
When things aren't
Yeah.
going well, it's hard to focus on God's got me, I'm gonna be okay.
Sure.
It's easier.
I got to keep remembering where we're going, you know.
Yeah, it's harder to think about where I'm going when there's a problem right in front of me that I have to tackle.
Yeah. Yeah, and we all know the come on now, we can do this. We all know what that talk is all like. But, we get sort of overwhelmed and it's discouraging and, there's things around us that we just don't like and, we're a family and families, tend to have problems. And so churches have that kind of thing. And you're saying, oh, I don't know. I know last week was really good, but this lady over here really bothers me now. It's a distraction for me. And it's really not. I mean, I think for us, we get discouraged much more easily. And I don't say that because in the sense that your problems aren't worthwhile. Because that's not the way we do it. We shouldn't be saying, well, my problems really aren't that bad. No, they're bad. But what? They're promised we're going to get those. And so what we have to do is not, try to make our problems a little bit nicer. We've got to say this is what's always been promised to us. And what we have to do is what? Be trusting in God. And that's hard, isn't it? Because there's a lot of things that get in our way. All right, so they get there, and it says, on the day when I chose Israel and swore the descendants of the house of Jacob, I made myself known to them in the land of Egypt, where I swore to them, saying, I am the Lord your God. And who was his tool to get this happening? Starts with an M. Ends with an S. Moses, thank you. Okay. So he says, on that day I swore to them to bring them from the land of Egypt into a land that I had selected for them, flowing with milk and honey, which is the glory of all lands. Now, was God kind of being sort of deceptive here? Because what does he not tell them? It just may get a little rough along the way. See, he doesn't tell them that. He just says, that's where we're going. That is what matters, and that's for us when we're thinking about heaven. We know what's going to come. But that's hard, even though I know I could die tomorrow, it still seems like it's a long ways out there to when I might die. So, there they are. They've got this great promise. And I said to them, cast away each of you the detestable things of his eyes, and do not defile yourself with the idols of Egypt. Now, we have noticed this before, but this is why God points this out. I mean, is idolatry a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. All right, but it just is interesting to me because it's not that you just read this in the book of Exodus. This shows up in some of these recounting of this event. And this is what always gets thrown out there. Why are you carrying these idols with you? Now, why does that seem silly to you? I mean, I'm just asking you, and I know when you get up here and Robert asks questions and Carrie asks questions, we have in our heads, what the answer is, but you guys oftentimes don't read our minds. Strange thing. Go ahead, Dana. License a lot of that.
So we look at what they have done, the example of the idols, and we think, how in the world, I would never do that.
That'd be the last thing you'd want to have with you, you would think.
We're doing it every day.
Yeah.
That's us.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah, we have to, it's obviously not literal idols, but they are the same things that sort of, what?
Distract me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they can be good and they can be bad. Go ahead, Robert. I've seen your thumb moving back there.
No, I didn't have anything to add.
Okay. You know how I love the comments, Robert. Okay. But they rebelled against me and were not willing to listen to me. And they did not cast away the detestable things of their eyes. That's such a an amazing way to describe. He doesn't say, those pretty little things that you guys are kind of attracted to. God says they are detestable. So that's that perspective, that oftentimes we don't have. We look at these things and we put so much value on them, but yet God doesn't see it that way. Okay, so and then I resolved to pour out my wrath on them to accomplish my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. So this is kind of almost as they're going out, and then of course a lot of that land between the promised land and Egypt was kind of owned and certainly dominated by them. But anyway, he says, I want you to remember this. Go ahead, Dave.
Before I forget it, what you just said about the things of their eyes,
Yeah.
the things that they see, isn't it interesting that matches exactly what John said in 1 John 2:15, the three things.
Yeah. Go ahead and tell everybody. Tell them.
Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and pride of life.
Okay. So there they are. That kind of puts it, encapsulate it, doesn't it? And so that happened to them, and it's always there. Now, I can understand, I guess, why they would still be connected to those things from a very worldly point of view. And what crazy thing do you think I might be thinking in this regard? All right. When your house burns down, if that happens to you, and you're out there in front of your house, and you look at it, and someone says, what about the, and you go, what? All that matters is that we are okay. We're safe. So then we cherish these things. If we get something out of that fire, it's just so valuable to us. And it really, you can really understand how it almost becomes like a little idol. All right, so that's what's happening. This is the pattern. God says, go ahead, do what you're doing, but realize that I'm going to pour my wrath out on you. All right. Now, we're trying to figure out what they did wrong. Now, what about the kings? If you had to criticize them, if you can remember back that far, what's bad? What bad thing is said about them? It does not describe a whole lot. It just tells us. Let's see. They're little kitty cats, and then they go out and they grow up, and then what do they start doing? Devouring, tearing things up. So when you think about it, you think, I mean, that sounds like a pretty bad person. This person, these kings, deserve whatever they have coming. For me, I just want God to understand me and recognize that I'm really trying. And I hope that'll be good enough. But really, God is not, He doesn't want us to try harder. He wants us to trust Him, and based on how much we trust Him, then, not that these things become easier, but they have meaning to us now, that we say, I can do this with the power of God. So, what else did they? Because in running across this, and you read that up there, what did they violate? Sabbaths. See, pretty much, they just sound like they're killing people and destroying things and worshiping idols. And this is one of the few places where he says, and you're also abusing my Sabbaths. So this is where it gets into something where there's this religious order, and there's the way they worship and how they treat the Sabbaths. And of course, how does that happen? What do they do? How do they abuse a Sabbath? What were they supposed to be doing? Resting, or certain other things they were supposed to do associated with that you might call worship. Sacrifices were being offered. But it wasn't just that they were brutal people and like barbarians. They also just thought, I just don't have time for this. Or whatever it is that made them think this is not that important. And then you get enough people thinking that way, and then they kind of start feeding off of one another, and then they're all ended up feeling like this is okay, it really doesn't matter. But, God says that they might know that I am Lord who sanctifies them. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not, again, are the commandments essential, in our understanding of who God is? It did not walk in my statutes. And where would they probably get that? From the law of Moses, right? The Ten Commandments and the things associated with the worship, like in the book of Leviticus and different things related to the law. They also rejected my ordinances, by which if a man observes them, he will live, and my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. What's profaned mean? Dishonored. Yeah. What else? Okay, the definition of the word is make something common. That's what it is. Okay, so you've not treated this. I mean, they were probably just looking at the rest aspect of this, but not so much in the remembering who God was. And that's what the time was really all about. So, I mean, I can get really with it here when I'm thinking about the kings being so mean and the people, offering sacrifices of their children. We'll see this a little bit later. That's the kind of stuff that they did. But that also bothered God. So it is important when God asks us to do something, to respect certain things. It's important that we do those things. That's also a part of it. So then I resolved to pour out my wrath on them. I mean, he doesn't say, and he says, in the wilderness to annihilate them. Now, there are certain situations here where this was a little bit more profound. But I acted for the sake of my name. This shows up 3 or 4 times in this text. I did this for the sake of my name. Okay, does anybody have any idea what God might have meant there? Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Right.
But his people also is what I'm looking at here, because he says that it should not be profane in the sight of the nations, much less his own people.
Right.
But what comes to mind while I'm reading this is lawlessness.
Right.
And we have a nation here that is a lot of,
Yeah. A whole bunch. Yeah.
Society is just breaking down.
Yeah, and so how does it make us all look? Okay.
God's people should be above it.
Well, right. And so, but God actually takes over here in some way. He says, I acted for the sake of my name. In other words, I wasn't, if you go on and find out in some of these situations, he didn't totally wipe them off the map, because what did he always say? And what did they say sometimes? If you make life miserable for us, what are these people out there going to think? So God does consider that, his reputation. Does that make sense, or is that? Go ahead. No.
I'm thinking of when the spies went out and spied the
Right.
land, and they found the big giant people.
Sure.
Joshua and can't remember the other guy.
Caleb.
They said, if God is with us, we can do it.
Yeah.
And so God wanted to destroy them then.
Yeah.
Then Moses said, well, if you destroy them, then the people around you will say, he brought all these people out here to
Sure.
destroy them.
Yeah. So I think this, in some ways, can kind of bother us. God's straightforward. You do it right, you do it wrong. I'll make all the judgments. And there are certain things that happen that bring dishonor to God. And God knows that that's not good, even though all that really matters is their obedience to me. Go ahead, Tadell.
I'm not sure he's talking about a name thing, but he's talking about for the sake of my name. I don't think he's worried about his reputation. I think he was thinking of the big picture and the end results.
Right.
So he was doing it because
Yeah.
So he was still leaving a path for Christ to
And so that's kind of in the background, isn't it? You know, because we've still got to get to the land. We need to take the land, and then ultimately, through the tribe of Judah, we're going to have that eternal king. So that's a good point. Okay. Richard, do you have your hand up? Okay. So he said that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations before whose sight I had brought them out. So, when he took the people out, I mean, just generally, I think Tadell's got a real good point. There's the big picture here. But were people impressed with that? A lot of them were. They were, because remember when they entered into the land of Canaan, they were saying, "Man, you got to stay away from these guys. God's with them." Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I'm reminded of what God says through Nathan to David, is I'm taking the child because you've given an excuse for the nations
Right.
to blaspheme and profane my name.
Yeah.
It's not so much that just David sinned, it's David was seen as his servant of God,
Yeah.
as a man after God's own heart, and when he falls and he does all the things that happened with Uriah and Bathsheba,
Yeah.
it has an impact to give others.
It has a public impact, doesn't it?
Exactly, it has a public impact, and that's what this reminds me of. Is
Right.
that if the people are seen to be rebellious to God, a God whom they publicly are a part of, or who is a part of their nation, it gives the rest of the world a reason to say, not going to pay attention.
Right, and that's what they do. I mean, that's what people do. And so when you think about that, I hear people say, well, my sin's between me and God. I'm sorry, folks. It's not just between you and God. Other people are affected by your sin. Some more so than others. And God doesn't like that, because this sounds a little bit petty, but I mean, it just makes him look bad. But I think that was a part of this. But I think ultimately, going back to Tadell's point, to give that credit, the reality is that we've got somewhere to go, and we've got to get there, and God has a larger plan in mind. So good. All right, so their children were also warned. In other words, this is kind of like the next generation. I said to their children in the wilderness, do not walk in the statutes of your fathers, or keep their ordinances, or defile yourself with their idols. Why? I am the Lord your God. Walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and observe them. So, do we learn from our parents sometimes in a bad way? Their example is maybe not so good. And so, when we really are focused on the Lord, what we do is yes, it's a lousy thing when our parents aren't what they're supposed to be. But in the end, I'm responsible for me. And so he says, this is all you guys got to do. Walk in my statutes, sanctify my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. So it wasn't just for them to have something to do that's meaningful on the Sabbath day. What was it supposed to do? Supposed to teach them what? At the end of verse 20. Yeah, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. But the children rebelled against me. These kids, I tell you, what do you do with them? They're just as bad as the parents. They did not walk in my statutes, nor were they careful to observe my ordinances, by which if a man observes them, he will live. They profaned my Sabbaths, so I resolved to pour out my wrath on them to accomplish my anger against them in the wilderness. But I withdrew my hand and acted for the sake of my name. Short plan, big plan, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations. See, it matters. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm just thinking of this in terms of a father and family. The father sets down the rules. The kid runs them up. He goes stealing things and
Yeah, like in Ezekiel 18, we talked about that.
bad language
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. Well,
Right.
if the father comes down and spanks the kid and puts him back in line,
Right.
It's a reflection on the family, what that kid is doing.
Yeah. And then that makes a reflection on God, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, so that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nation. So this is all important, in trying to understand what's going on here and what did these guys do wrong that God is so angry with them that he wants to destroy them. And these things may not seem to be that significant. Again, there will be things that they will do. Let's see, how are we doing time-wise? James, you got a point?
I was thinking there's a lot of similarities almost when God killed Nadab and Abihu for offering a profane fire. He
Yeah.
told Moses that to the people I must be regarded as holy.
Yeah.
And so they've obviously been failing that for such a long time here.
Yeah, and so it wasn't just a couple of dumb kids messing things up over here. What they're doing has impact on the world, our world around them. So I pronounced them unclean. Skip on down to verse 26. They didn't obey the statutes. They didn't want to live by them, in that they caused all their firstborn to pass through the fire so that they might make them desolate, in order that they might know that I am the Lord. Now, where did we hear more directly from that? What king? Manasseh, right. Okay, so there it's presented to us in a sort of historical form. He says, therefore, Son of Man, speak to the house of Israel. Now, who's the Son of Man? Yeah, I try to put myself in his place. Knowing how God feels about these people, it says, okay, now you go talk to him again for how many different times? As we're going through this, it was just been going on day after day, or certainly regularly. Yet in this your fathers have blasphemed me by acting treacherously against me. Now, what's the difference between profaning Sabbaths and having your children walk through the fire? Do we have a different reaction to that? I do. That shows just how wicked they had become, so self-oriented and so much that, because we know the people who worship the idols did this, and so, hey, we'll just do what they're doing. So, here's my point. There are sins that are really, really bad, and there are sins that aren't so bad, meaning the impact. But it's all sin. It's all sin. And you and I still need the blood of Christ to be saved from those sins. And so we need to be faithful to him, whatever it may be. But not to play this game, well, boy, at least I haven't, sacrificed any children. Boy. See that little badge I have right there saying I've never done that? Anyway, what's the picture? You're going back now to this whole thing about, Dave, what you talked about with the parents and the children. Okay, how are the children doing now? Not good. They're doing bad. And again, a lot of times we do see people who have parents that are, wicked. Just, they don't help you in any way spiritually. And you turn out okay. But these guys, what did they do? Just followed up what was being done by their parents, and even worse. It doesn't say anything about the parents doing what? The children, march the children through the fire. But none of us would say, oh yeah, those are really good people. We know that their heart was not with God. And it's the same thing. And then they ended up producing these children. Okay. But as is often the case, when things look really, really gloomy, you can read this in chapter 20, verse 33 through 44. We've already talked about this 2 or 3 times. I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'm going to punish them this way and this way. But what's going to happen? I'm going to restore them back at some point. Now, what we're talking about when Nehemiah, he's leading the people back to their land. And I'm going to talk about that one more time on Sunday. But they're going back just like it was promised. Now, this doesn't last forever, because what we have here is we've got king, 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 and then we've got kingdom, kingdom, kingdom. All these people are coming in to make life difficult for them. And what is it all about? It's all worth it because of the eternal king. These aren't eternal kings. These are like little lion cubs. Yeah. We work to honor that God. So that time of restoration will come, and it's mentioned already 3 or 4 times. All right, so I thought, since we're having a good time here going through all their sins and all their faults, I thought as I came to the end of here, I said, well, why not just go ahead and make the list? Shedding blood in their midst meant they were killing people, in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. Making and worshiping idols, we already know about that. Showed contempt to mothers and fathers. That sounds like, compared to everything else here, it doesn't seem like a really big deal. But to God, it is a big deal, isn't it? That's why he says, honor your father and your mother. All right, so these are all there in Ezekiel 22. They're just a part of the package that says, here's why you have left me. They had their enemies make fun of them because of their sins. So, God doesn't like that. Then they get involved in all these sexual activities, abomination of a neighbor's wife. They profane God's Sabbath, sexual sin with your own family and your neighbors. Bribed to commit murder, meaning people, they would take bribes. It's like watching The Godfather or something like that, Someone comes along and says, I need a favor right now. I told you that I would want one. Here's what I want. I want you to go out and bump off somebody. Okay. And they also killed to make a profit. So we'll close up. Someone look at chapter 22, 28 through 29. Go ahead, Clay. Clay has this way of sort of slumping down in his seat. Oh, he's setting up now. I got him last time because I said, why is it I never see you when I look over there? The guy's only 6'3" and weighs 240 pounds. You figure he'd stand out a little bit. Okay, go ahead, Clay. 28, 29.
Her prophets plastered them with untempered mortar, seeing false visions and inviting lies for them, saying, thus says the Lord God, when the Lord has not spoken. The people of the land have used oppressions, committed robbery, and mistreated the poor and needy, and they wrongfully oppressed the stranger.
Okay, so they get involved with the idolatry and also the mysticism that is a part of what is going on around them. So those are just in chapter 22. Now, again, what's the purpose of God having Ezekiel tell them this? So they'll all be depressed? Stop doing it, yes. Stop doing it. And this is what it's produced. This is why we're going through this whole thing of you guys going over to, or up to Assyria and then over to Babylon. Go ahead, Robert. Okay. You're going to have to sit and hold your hands in, Robert. I'm feeling very benevolent, Let Robert have his talk, Okay. That's it. So, Ezekiel's job seems to be tell these people why all these bad things are happening to them. It's just that simple. With the idea, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change them right on the spot, but it might change them when. When all of a sudden they see the smoke beginning to settle and they realize this was all about this behavior. And God did not appreciate it. And God will not be mocked. And it's tough to get beyond that because we think we can fool him. But he knows. You see, Ezekiel didn't necessarily know it all. But how did he know it? That they were doing all these things. God told him. God told him, right? Is that what you said? Yeah, is that what you said? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Just checking. All right, now, so anybody else want to say anything? Yes, go ahead, Barbara.
People have been complaining that God wasn't there, wasn't paying any attention to them, didn't care about them anymore.
Right.
Well, he sends Ezekiel in there to say, I do care.
Yeah.
I'm paying attention.
Yeah, I didn't get this list just, sitting up here twiddling my thumbs in heaven. He knew what was going on. And it was offensive to him. And again, let's face it, Ezekiel did, have a book named after him, which, that's quite a reward. But I think most of us would rather have not been in his place. I'd like to think I could have done it like he did it. But he only knew why, because God told him. Sure, he was aware of what was going on, but he didn't completely understand the depth of it. He had to see it from God's perspective. Okay? All right. Dave Rice, would you lead us in a word of prayer, please? Thank you.
Father in heaven, we are so thankful that you give us such grace and love, that you provide your word, Heavenly Father, that we might understand you better and the things that you expect of us. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for Randy and what he's presented this evening. We thank you for the help that allows us to come here together with brothers and sisters to learn more about you. Father, be with us as we depart from this place. Keep us mindful, Heavenly Father, of our brethren that are hurt in the hospital and not feeling well. Help us to be loving and good to each other. In His precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all.